All right, so are you ready to learn something new today? Because we are, and we're diving deep into an English learning podcast.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one, I think.
Nice.
So this podcast episode, it really blew me away. It talks about all these amazing benefits of learning that go way beyond acing a test or getting a good grade. It's like learning is a superpower or something.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say superpower because they use this really interesting analogy in the episode. They compare learning to, like, upgrading from a bicycle to a rocket ship.
Okay, I like that.
It's about pushing your limits and transforming yourself.
Yeah, and it's not just about knowing more stuff, right? It's about actually changing the way your brain works.
Exactly.
Like when they said learning is like a mental marathon, I was like, ooh, yeah, I felt that. You know those times when you're really concentrating and you can just feel your brain working?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's actually some fascinating science behind that feeling. The podcast talks about how learning literally rewires our brains. Like, it triggers the creation of new neural pathways and strengthens those connections.
So it's like a workout for your brain.
Exactly. Just like physical exercise strengthens our bodies. Learning keeps our brain sharp and agile.
Wow. So it's not just about knowing more, it's about making your brain more powerful.
That's the idea. And they go into some specific cognitive benefits, too, like how continuous learning can improve memory recall, problem-solving skills, even decision-making.
Oh, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and get this. They even mentioned some studies that showed how people who are lifelong learners tend to have better cognitive function as they get older. It helps ward off that age-related decline.
So learning is an investment in your future self.
Exactly, both mentally and professionally.
Okay, speaking of professionally, this podcast also gets into how being a lifelong learner can be a huge advantage in your career.
Absolutely. They made a really strong case for how important it is to be adaptable, especially in today's job market. Things change so quickly. What's in demand today might be obsolete tomorrow.
Oh, I feel that pressure all the time to keep learning new things just to stay relevant.
Yeah. But the podcast reframes that pressure as a positive thing. It's not about feeling overwhelmed. It's about being empowered to constantly learn and grow so you can adapt to whatever comes your way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And besides adaptability, they also talked about how learning new skills can boost your confidence.
Oh, yeah, I get that. That I got this feeling after you finally figure something out.
It's like a superpower. Right? It makes you feel more capable and more willing to take on new challenges.
Yeah, exactly. Learning gives you the tools and the mindset to face those challenges head on.
Right. And that confidence can spill over into all areas of your life, not just your career.
So learning can make you a more confident person overall.
Absolutely.
I like it.
And speaking of things I like, they also spent some time talking about the benefits of language learning.
Oh, yeah. Always a good topic.
Right, and they go beyond just the practical benefits, like being able to order food in a foreign country. They talk about how learning a new language can actually broaden your perspective and help you connect with other cultures on a deeper level.
I've always thought it'd be so cool to be able to really understand another culture through their language.
It's an amazing experience. The podcast talks about how language is more than just words. It's like a window into a whole different way of thinking and experiencing the world.
That's a cool way to put it.
Yeah. And they also touch on some effective strategies for language learning, too, emphasizing things like active engagement and not being afraid to make mistakes.
So it's not just about memorizing vocabulary lists.
No.
Yeah?
It's about actually using the language and immersing yourself in it. They had some really interesting tips about watching movies with subtitles, finding a language partner to practice with, even learning from comics.
Learning from comics? Now that's an idea I can get behind.
Right. It's about finding ways to make learning fun and engaging so you actually stick with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Because ultimately, learning should be a rewarding experience. It's not just about the end goal. It's about the journey itself.
Okay, I'm sold. Learning is a superpower. I'm ready to put on my cape and conquer some new skills.
That's the spirit. But before we get too carried away, there's more to unpack.
Okay, what else did this podcast have to say?
Well, they got into some really practical tips for how to actually make learning stick. How to overcome those moments when you hit a wall and you just don't feel like learning anymore.
Okay, yeah, I need some help with that sometimes.
Don't we all? But that's what we're going to dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear more. But first, let's take a quick break to process all this brain-boosting goodness. We'll be right back.
So, one thing that really stood out to me from that podcast was how they talked about the importance of understanding your learning style.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. It's like everyone learns differently, right?
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another. So they actually break it down into these three main categories.
Okay, lay it on me.
Okay, so first up, we've got the visual learners. These are the people who learn best by seeing information.
So like pictures and diagrams and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Videos, charts, anything that's visually appealing.
I'm definitely a visual learner. I love using highlighters and making mind maps. It just makes everything so much clearer for me.
Right. And then we have the auditory learners.
Oh, those are the ones who learn best by listening, right?
You got it. They absorb information best through their ears. So think lectures, podcasts, audiobooks, even just having a good conversation about the topic.
I have a friend who's like that. She's all about those audiobooks. She says she can get through a whole book way faster than if she was reading it.
Makes sense.
Mm.
For them, hearing information spoken aloud makes it much easier to process and remember.
Okay, so visual learners, auditory learners, who else is there?
Last but not least, we have the kinesthetic learners.
Oh, I've heard of those. They're like the hands-on learners, right?
Exactly. They need to move, they need to interact, they need to experience things firsthand.
So those are the people who love workshops and labs and building things with their own two hands.
You nailed it. Kinesthetic learners learn best when they can actively apply the knowledge. They're not just passively absorbing information. They're actually doing something with it.
I can see how that would make a huge difference in how well you remember something.
For sure. And what's cool is you can often combine these different learning styles.
Mm.
You know, like imagine watching a documentary about a historical event and then listening to a podcast interview with a historian and then going to a museum exhibit about that same event.
Wow, you're hitting all the senses.
Exactly. You're giving your brain multiple ways to process and store that information.
I like it. It's like a learning power combo.
Right. But even when you know your learning style, there's still those times when you hit a wall, you know?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like when you're trying to learn something new and it just feels so hard and you want to give up.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
But that's where those effective learning strategies come into play. Remember we talked about those in the first part?
Yeah, vaguely refresh my memory.
Okay, so one that they highlighted was the Feynman technique.
Feynman technique. Now that does ring a bell. Remind me how that works again.
It's actually pretty simple. The idea is to explain the concept you're trying to learn as if you're teaching it to a child.
Okay.
By simplifying it and breaking it down to its core elements, you really force yourself to understand it on a deeper level.
That's so smart. I do that all the time when I'm trying to explain something to my kids. It really helps me make sure I actually get it myself.
Right. And another technique they mentioned was spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition. Okay, that one sounds familiar too.
Yeah.
But I could use a quick refresher.
So basically, it's about revisiting information at increasing intervals. Like you learn something new, and then you review it a little while later, and then you review it again a little while after that.
So it's like giving your brain little reminders along the way so you don't forget.
Precisely. It takes advantage of the way our brains naturally forget things over time. And by spacing out your review sessions, you can actually strengthen those neural connections and make the knowledge stick.
That's so cool. It's like hacking your brain to make it remember things better.
Right. And then there's active recall.
Active recall. Oh yeah, that one's a good one. What was that again?
So basically, it involves actively retrieving information from your brain without looking at your notes.
So like quizzing yourself.
Exactly. Or
Sure.
trying to explain a concept from memory before checking your notes.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would be way more effective than just passively reading through your notes.
It really forces your brain to work harder.
Yeah,
And that effort is what helps solidify those memories.
makes sense. What other tips did they have?
Well, another important one was to find ways to make learning personally relevant.
Oh yeah, I love that idea. Like if I'm trying to learn a new language, maybe I should focus on vocabulary that's related to my hobbies or the places I want to travel.
Exactly. When you can connect the information to your own life, it becomes much more engaging and memorable.
It's like you're actually using it for something instead of just memorizing random facts.
Right. And finally, and this is a big one, they emphasize the importance of embracing mistakes.
Oh yeah, that's so hard sometimes, especially when you're first starting out.
I know. But the podcast made a really good point. They said you have to let go of perfectionism and remind yourself that every expert was once a beginner.
That's a good reminder. It's like you can't be afraid to mess up. You have to be willing to make mistakes in order to learn and grow.
Exactly. Mistakes are valuable learning opportunities. They help you identify where you need to improve and refine your understanding.
Okay, this is all starting to sound less intimidating and more like an exciting adventure.
That's the spirit. But I know what you're thinking. All these strategies sound great, But how do you actually find the time and motivation to make it happen?
Oh, yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Well, luckily, the podcast had some advice on that too. They talked about the importance of setting realistic goals.
Okay, so not trying to learn everything at once.
Exactly. Start
Mhm.
small. Maybe dedicate just 15 minutes a day to your chosen skill. The key is consistency, not intensity.
15 minutes a day, I can do that. C, it's doable. And they also recommended finding a learning buddy or joining a community of like-minded people.
Oh, yeah. Accountability partners. That's a great idea. It's like having someone to cheer you on and keep you motivated.
Exactly. And they also talked about celebrating your progress no matter how small.
Okay, I need to work on that. I'm so bad at celebrating the small wins.
It's easy to get caught up in how far you have to go, but acknowledging those small victories along the way can really boost your motivation and keep you going.
It's like giving yourself a little pat on the back for all your hard work.
Right. And finally, they encourage listeners to experiment and find what works best for them. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to learning.
That's a good point. It's like you have to find what clicks for you and what keeps you engaged.
Exactly. It's about making learning fun and enjoyable. So they left listeners with this really powerful question.
Okay, what was it?
What's stopping you from pursuing that one skill you've always wanted to learn?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I need to sit with that one for a minute. We all do. But that's a perfect segue into the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, what are we tackling next?
We're going to get a little more introspective and explore how to identify and overcome those internal barriers that might be holding us back.
That sounds juicy. I'm ready. Let's do it. So we've talked about all these amazing strategies for learning new things and making that knowledge stick. But sometimes the biggest hurdle isn't the how, it's the why not, you know?
It's like we get in our own way sometimes.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's talk about those internal barriers, those mental blocks that can hold us back from pursuing our passions.
Yeah, that final question from the podcast really got me thinking, what's stopping you? It's so simple, but so powerful.
It's like a call to action.
Right, exactly. It forces you to confront those excuses, those fears, those limiting beliefs that are holding you back.
Because sometimes those beliefs are so ingrained we don't even realize they're there, you know?
Absolutely. We might tell ourselves, I'm too old to learn that, or I don't have the time, or I'm just not good at that kind of thing.
Yeah, all those classic self-sabotaging thoughts.
And it's so easy to get discouraged before you even start.
Totally.
Yeah.
So how do we break free from those mental chains?
Well, the first step is awareness. You have to start paying attention to that inner voice, that little voice in your head that whispers doubts and fears.
Oh, yeah. That little voice can be a real jerk sometimes.
It can.
Yeah.
But once you become aware of it, you can start to challenge it. Question those negative thoughts and ask yourself, is this really true? Or is this just fear talking?
It's like taking back control of your thoughts.
Exactly. You have the power to choose what you believe. And remember, everyone starts somewhere. Every expert was once a beginner.
Yeah, they had to learn those skills just like we do.
Exactly. And they probably made a ton of mistakes along the way.
Which brings us to another important point. Self-compassion.
Oh, yeah. That's huge. The podcast really emphasized the importance of being kind to yourself throughout the learning process.
Because it's not always going to be easy, right? There are going to be times when you get frustrated or you feel like giving up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's when you need to cut yourself some slack. And remember that it's okay to make mistakes. It's all part of the process.
Yeah, it's about progress, not perfection.
Right. And celebrating those small wins along the way.
So true. Sometimes we get so focused on the end goal that we forget to appreciate how far we've already come.
So my final piece of advice for anyone feeling inspired to learn something new is this. Take that first step. It doesn't have to be anything big. Just start somewhere.
Maybe do a little research, sign up for a class, find a book on the topic, whatever it is, just make that initial commitment and prove to yourself that you're serious about learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, learning should be fun. So find something that sparks your curiosity, something that you're genuinely interested in.
That's what it's all about, right? Following your passions and expanding your horizons.
Absolutely. So go out there and learn something amazing.
We'll be here cheering you on every step of the way.
And until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring all the incredible possibilities that lie ahead.
That's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.